Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God.
Okay, any questions on anything? This I was almost said this morning. It feels like it ought to be morning. This evening. Okay, then let's get on to Ezekiel. We're picking up our study in Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 11. And we're looking at the abomination in Israel. Thus says the Lord God, clap your hands and stamp your feet, and say, Alas, because of all the evil abominations of the house of Israel, for they shall fall by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. He who is afar off shall die of pestilence, and he who is near shall fall by the sword, and he who is left and is preserved shall die of famine. Thus I will spend my fury upon them. And you shall know that I am the Lord, when their slain lie among their idols, around their altars, and on the high hill, and all the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every leafy oak, wherever they offered pleasing aroma to all their gods. And I will stretch out my hand against them, and make the land desolate and waste in all their dwelling places, from the wilderness to Riblah. They shall know that I am the Lord. So Ezekiel continues in his prophecy against Israel from what God told him to say. He's telling Israel, this is what's going to happen. Ezekiel tells the exiled Jews to clap their hands and stomp their feet, because all the abominations that the house of Israel had committed are going to come back to them. The punishment they would sustain over the period of dispersion was warranted because by God, because of the sins of Israel. They caused this to happen. God was obligated. Here's what you need to hear. God was obligated by his covenant with them to punish them. People always forget that. They think the Old Testament God is just a vengeful God. No, remember, he entered into a covenant with Israel that said, if you're good, you get to stay in the land. If you're not, I'll punish you. I'll remove you from the land. And they obviously were not good. Almost never were they good. And so he was obligated to punish them. I think that's a reality that we need to come to grips with. That God is not being mean when he punishes sin. His character obligates him to. Because of his character of justice and holiness. So Ezekiel uses phrases like he who is afar off and he who is near. He who is afar off is a reference to the Jews in every part of the world. This is the dispersion. Remember, I believe the dispersion began in 722 when the northern tribes are taken, and then is continuing now as the southern tribes are taken, and I believe continues to continue until the end of the tribulation. In other words, from 722 until the end of the Battle of Armageddon, the dispersion of Jews will be in effect. Ezekiel is saying that the Jews all over the world will have to deal with this punishment, not just the Jews there in Israel. The ultimate result of this punishment of the Jews will be God's glory, and for Israel, the real knowledge of who God really is. Look what he says in verse 13. And you shall know that I am the Lord. When he punishes them, the end result is they will ultimately know that he is the sovereign God. Those slain during this time will be a testament to their own false gods. The fact that their false gods could not protect them. The fact that their false gods didn't do anything to provide for them. In other words, go ahead.
Does that mean that he's going to open their eyes to the truth? I mean, at this point, they don't even really get it.
No, and they probably died not getting it. But the instant they are in punishment, they will understand.
What this kind of reminds me of is you can say to someone, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, but until they actually experience it, then they realize why you said this.
Yeah.
Really? I was thinking about my coworker, but there's been a couple of instances of my
What did Kate say? We couldn't quite hear.
She said, oh, that sounds familiar.
Wow.
I think we're all guilty of that.
Yeah.
You're saying.
I feel all over here.
In verse 14, there's a statement that Ezekiel uses that has a lot of scholars really shaking their head, scratching their head, going, I don't really understand what's being said. And I will stretch out my hand against them and make the land desolate and waste in all their dwelling places, from the wilderness to Riblah. Then they will know that I am the Lord. There's some dispute among the scholars about what Riblah means, what the location is of Riblah. In the net notes, it reads the Latin Vulgate reads the name Riblah as the city north of Damascus, of varying spellings, I understand. Right, Brian? Various spellings of Damascus? Yeah.
Yeah, mine says Dibla, D-I-B.
Yeah, Dibla, right.
I only had 3 different versions.
Of Damascus, right. The Masoretic text reads Dibla with a D, a city otherwise unknown. The letters Resh, which is how Riblah is spelled, and Dalet, which is how Dibla is spelled, may have been confused in the Hebrew text. They look almost identical. The Resh and the Dalet look almost identical. If you want to know how close they look, think of seeing an O and think of seeing a 0. They look identical in a lot of typesets, and that's kind of true of the Resh and the Dalet. The town Riblah was in the land of Hamath, 2 Kings 23:33, which has represented the northern border of Israel, according to Ezekiel 47:14. That's in what the net notes read. So if the original includes Riblah with the Resh, Ezekiel is speaking of all of Israel, with the wilderness in the south and then the north to the city of Riblah, north of Damascus. All of Israel would be in view. If the original text is Diblah, which is believed to be in Moab, the orientation of what Ezekiel is describing is not north and south, it's east and west. But is believed to still be a reference somehow, and that's why scholars are kind of confused, how the east-west reference is still a reference to all of Israel. Either way...
The Jewish translation comes out Diblah Desert.
Yeah, and it could be either. The problem is we don't have the original writing, so we don't know whether it was a Resh or a Dalet. And there are different places, and so it's just a mystery. It's one of those things we can't really solve at this point. We do conclude that he's talking about all of Israel, but we don't see all of Israel being described in those terms all the time. For us, a map normally has north to the top. For the Jew, a map normally has east to the top. So we don't know. Yeah, it's kind of weird for us to look at a map with east at the top. But that's typically the way the ancient Near East did it. So it's just one of those things that you go, doesn't change what we understand. We don't know what city's in view, but that's one of those things. So we move on to the announcement of the end. We're moving into chapter 7 now. Any questions on 6? Okay, then announcement of the end. Ezekiel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. The word of the Lord came to me, and you, O son of man, thus says the Lord God to the land of Israel, an end. The end has come upon the four corners of the land. Oops, that was 2 verses. Again, we see Ezekiel's addressed as the Son of Man, and God provides Ezekiel with the prophecy. God says to Ezekiel, tell them this. Remember, he was given the instruction earlier, don't tell them anything until I tell you to tell them, and only tell them what I tell them. Don't dare tell them what I won't tell you. So, Ezekiel is a good old boy, and he's doing what he's told, and God says, tell him this. So he tells him this. God tells Ezekiel that the end is approaching. In the previous chapter, the word of the Lord came and focused on the idolatry that caused God to bring a new message here in chapter 7. Here at the beginning of chapter 7, the focus is on the punishment due to Judah because of her idolatry. God said that the end has come to the four corners of the land. Clearly a reference not to be taken completely literally. It is a more figurative of the entirety of Israel. It's just like when we say the four corners of the earth. It's a globe. It doesn't have corners.
Doesn't that relate back to Revelations, what is it, 2:1? Or is that 7:1? 7:1, I guess.
Well, Ezekiel can't relate back to Revelation. It would have to be the other way, because Ezekiel was written 600 years, 700 years before Revelation.
Yes, but it comes back around, I guess I should say, in Revelation.
So what you're saying is Revelation 7:1 relates back to Ezekiel.
Yes.
That would work. Although off the top of my head, I can't tell you what 7:1 says.
It says, after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth.
Yeah, it's a like statement. It means the exact same thing, all of the earth. Because obviously the earth, being round, a sphere, doesn't have corners.
The Flatlanders think there's 4 corners.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's one of the reasons that people that are very condescending to biblical believers, well, they must be flat earthers if they think it has a corner.
Yeah.
Not one portion of Judah is going to be spared. God is saying to the exiles that Judah is about to be completely wiped out. No portion of Judah, no portion of the land that remains Israel will be spared. All of it will be taken, including the interior of the city of Jerusalem, which they thought was not possible to conquer. Now the end is upon you, and I will send my anger upon you. I don't want God to ever say that about me, that I'll send my anger upon you. I will judge you according to your ways, and I will punish you for all your abominations. And my eye will not spare you, nor will I have pity, but I will punish you for your ways, while your abominations are in your midst. Then you will know that I am the Lord. The ominous warning coming from God revealed the true extent of punishment that would be coming to Judah. 5 times in these early verses, God says that the end of Judah has come. God says he's unleashing his anger against Israel without pity. What we need to understand here is that God is not lashing out in emotion. This is not God taking his toys and going home. This is God doing what he promised to do. Doing God what he was contractually obligated to do. The characterizing of God through the use of human emotions is what we call anthropomorphization. I've been hanging with Brian too much. Anthropomorphization. It's terrible, isn't it? He was anthropomorphizing. I got that one. My sister said, oops, forgot. Yeah, that doesn't help my self-esteem at all, does it?
Hey, listen, I have to set my alarm. I'm sorry.
But she's my sister.
I know.
It'd be like my wife
she
forgetting.
loves you a lot.
She loves to torment me a lot. So what we're doing when we make these comments about God is we're putting human characteristics on him so that we can understand him. It's like saying the face of God or the hand of God. Does he have one? God the Father certainly doesn't, because he's spirit, right? So, yeah. So the anthropomorphic, I can't say it tonight. I have to go and get my teeth adjusted or something. I don't know.
Anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic.
Making God look human, attributing to God human characteristics, is just so that we can understand him, so that we can understand what he is. I don't know what a spirit is. I mean, I get Casper and so forth, but that's not what God is. I don't get what spirit truly is. So this process is one in which we make God, or we view God through the filter of what we understand. We can't force God to be in those characteristics. In other words, just by saying God has emotion or God has anger doesn't make those things our levels of anger or emotion. God doesn't respond out of emotion, but out of his character. Is he angry? Yes. But does he do evil out of anger? No. God is just. He's righteous. He's holy. In his holiness and his righteousness, he brings punishment on those who violate his character. But God is also gracious and merciful. So he doesn't bring punishment immediately. Sunday morning we worked through Ananias and Sapphira. There was a case where God brought punishment almost immediately. And those two were DRT. Aren't you glad God doesn't do that all the time?
Yeah.
His character obligates him. This is the most profound truth that I have learned in the last few years of study. God is obligated to punish sin. And he was even more obligated to punish the sin of Israel because he had a contract with them. And they violated it. He had to uphold his end of the contract.
And he did wait some time
Yeah, he waited a long, long time.
and sent prophets.
Prophet after prophet after prophet that they didn't listen to.
They killed him.
And then he sent his son, and they killed him. Just like the parable Jesus taught. So to describe God's response to the sin of Israel as just an emotional response is to neglect all of his character. Look at how the end of verse 4 is. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Lord there is a representation of the tetragrammaton, the Yod He Waw He, Jehovah. We use all those different words and Hebrew letters for it because we don't know how it was really pronounced. Because Yod He Waw He doesn't have any vowels. Just go ahead sometime and try to pronounce a word without vowels. It can't be done. And that's the problem we have reading ancient Hebrew. Our modern versions of ancient Hebrew have what are called vowel pointings that give us vowels, but they weren't in the original. We're only guessing at some of those, at probably most of those. So we don't know how Yod He Waw He was pronounced. And part of that is because a good Jew would never say it. And they couldn't write it out. And they didn't write vowels anyway. So they saved a lot of paper by not writing vowels. But it confused a lot of people. So when you read in your English text, Lord, all caps, that is Yod He Waw He. That is what's referred to theologically as the Tetragrammaton. It is the name of God, and it talks about his sovereignty, his omniscience, his omnipotence. It talks about him being the greatest, and not meaning Muhammad Ali. By God reminding them that he is Jehovah, the Lord, he reminds them that he's the creator, sustainer of the universe, the sovereign ruler of the world. He is the guy that creates it and sustains it all. So when he says he's going to punish you, it's going to be a bad day. The ultimate end of everything in the world is God will be glorified as the Yod He Waw He. Any questions about that? Hi, Mary. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
I've been battling off and on since Sunday, a migraine. And I just completely forgot it was Wednesday.
That's okay. You're not building my self-esteem. It's okay.
At least you don't have the headache to go with it.
Yeah.
No, it came back today.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
On to Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 5. Thus says the Lord God, disaster after disaster, behold, it comes. An end has come. The end has come. It is awakened against you. Behold, it comes. God continues to describe to Ezekiel that punishment is coming. God reiterates that he alone is God, the sovereign ruler. The coming punishment is an unprecedented disaster. I know we hear unprecedented a lot, but when God says it, it's truly real. It's never been seen. The Net translation puts it this way. This is what the sovereign Lord says. A disaster, a one-of-a-kind disaster is coming. Now think about God saying, I'm about to send a one-of-a-kind disaster on you. Has he ever proven that before?
Yep,
Yeah, we got the flood, right?
right.
What else?
When the ground opened up and swallowed, yeah.
Achan?
No. Well,
The
Achan-
golden calf people.
No, I was thinking, Dathan and Abiram
Oh, okay, yeah. What else?
and all their families and everything that they had.
What else? I think the Tower of Babel and the dispersion was a disaster. Certainly was contrary to what the people wanted, and it confused. God confused their language, and they couldn't do anything together. So when God says an unprecedented disaster, a one-of-a-kind disaster is coming, you have to think up something new. Something new is going to happen. Israel had never experienced what was about to be. I'm sorry, go ahead, Linda.
The Jewish Bible calls it a unique disaster.
That would be the definition of one of a kind.
It is.
I think I would duck.
Yeah.
That can cover it, doesn't cover it.
Yeah. The covenant between God and Israel was very specific, and it had been ratified and re-ratified several times in Israel's history. The covenant specified their use of the land was tied to their obedience to God. Yet God had not removed them from the land. That had led the people of Israel to believe God's not going to do it. Those are just blustery words from God. He doesn't really mean it.
He doesn't mean it like it sounds.
Yeah, he's not going to do that. Okay, maybe he'll kill a guy or two. but he's not going to take us all out. Of course, he's proven that he would, right? I mean, how many out of the millions or billions of people that were alive at Noah's flood, how many were spared? 8. So it's not like God hasn't demonstrated before that he would do this.
And they read about it in the Torah every year. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like they don't hear about it ever again either.
Yeah. But God hadn't yet removed them from the land. Oh, wait. They watched the northern tribes get taken into captivity. Yeah, but they really weren't that close to God. And then the people in Jerusalem watched Judah get gobbled up. So now it's just in Jerusalem. Yeah, but we're really the chosen. We're the special chosen. So he's not going to do it to us until he does. They just never believed it was going to happen, and then it did. And God kept telling him it's going to happen.
What's this? Ooh. Yeah. In 6 verses 6 and following. Ye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like God is saying to them, you have pushed this just as far as you can. The end is coming, and now it's here. So, as Nancy was saying, look what happens. Again, your doom has come to you, O inhabitant of the land. The time has come, the day is near, a day of tumult, and not of joyful shouting on the mountains. Now I will soon pour out my wrath upon you, and spend my anger against you, and judge you according to your ways, and I will punish you for all your abominations. And my eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. I will punish you according to your ways, while your abominations are in your midst. Then you will know that I am the Lord who strikes. Ooh, I'm the Lord who strikes. The destruction of Jerusalem, the removal of Judah from the land of Israel, is seen as doom. The word doom is the Hebrew word hisphra. The difficulty is that the definition of this word is not really known. In the ESV, the word is translated using 2 words, doom and diadem. 2 words that don't appear to have any relationship to each other. It appears to have a root with the idea of a circle or a sphere, which makes some sense of a diadem or crown. The Dictionary of Biblical Languages of Semitic Domain states circlet, crown, wreath, an adornment placed and worn on the head as a sign of honor or increase of status. Note, the circlet can either be metallic or a braided wreath, and the word suggests the latter. Doom or disaster, a state or condition of time of trouble, as a figurative extension of royal power, a crown, from an enemy. In context, this word is parallel to the word time in the next clause, and so temporal word is possible. So, an extension of royal power. Don't miss what this means. Who is God? Sovereign of the universe. His royal power is on display. There's a whole theological lesson in just this word. God is going to bring doom as the result of his sovereign royal power on the people of Israel. God is the king of the universe. He's bringing punishment upon Israel because they violated their covenant with him. He has the right and the responsibility, even the obligation, to bring the punishment. God is making very clear through Ezekiel that punishment is coming as a result of their actions and their abuse of God's mercy. They brought it on themselves, and they have no one to blame, no one other than themselves. They violated the character of God, and they violated their covenant with God. God won't spare them any of the punishment. He provided them mercy for hundreds of years, but they pushed too far, and the mercy was over, and punishment was sure. Again, we see the result of the punishment will be that Israel knows that God is the one who punishes them. The realization that God is the sovereign Lord is an essential lesson for us to know and learn. Ultimately, everything that occurs in the universe will bring glory to God and will show His sovereignty. We often think that the sin of this world reveals God's lack of control. We think that what's going on in the world reveals God's not actually in control and He's reactionary to what's going on, and that can't be further from the truth. God is never reactionary. God is never out of control. But ultimately, what goes on in the world will show God as sovereign and completely in control. We must always remember that God is always in control, even when it appears that He is not. But God didn't end there either. Behold the day, behold it comes, your doom has come, the rod has blossomed, pride has budded, violence has grown up into a rock of wickedness. None of them shall remain, nor their abundance, nor their wealth, neither shall there be preeminence among them. Woo! God uses various images to describe what has happened and what's going to happen. The first image is of a budding branch. It goes along for a while as a bud, and then all of a sudden it bursts forth into a full flower. We may also use the imagery of a rod being a reference to the rod of Aaron, as in Numbers 17. So in these analogies, God is saying, look, it's going to come suddenly. It's going to hit hard, and it's going to be something you can't stop. Any questions on that section? Okay, we're rolling on along then. Day of the Lord, Ezekiel 7:10 through 27. I don't know if we'll get through all of this, but we'll try. And the Lord said to Moses, put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign for the rebels, that you may make an end of the grumblings against me, lest they die. Oh, I should have... I put that in the wrong spot. Sorry about that. Ezekiel 12...
Where did we go?
Well, I messed up big time, didn't I?
You didn't.
Yeah, I just put the day of the Lord in the wrong spot.
Okay.
That's all. So the verses that I just skipped over were what I referenced to in Numbers 17. And the Lord said to Moses, put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign. The rod of Aaron was put into the Ark of the Covenant, that you make an end of their grumblings against me, lest they die. Thus did Moses as the Lord commanded him, so he did. So it may be that rod here is used as a reference to that. Judgment was coming. There was nothing that Israel could do to stop it. They had lost all their opportunity to stop it. God also says there will no longer be preeminence among the people. We have to think about what the Jews had been taught about who they were in reference to God, or in relationship to God. They understood their position with God was a special people. They were called His chosen people. They had a special relationship, and they had special rules with Him. They were, perhaps using modern vernacular, we would say they were first among equals. They didn't get saved any special way, but they had a special place in God's heart. And God had a special relationship with them. They interpreted that to mean they had special privileges. And in a way they kind of did, but they still had then special obligations. And God said, look, all of that relationship stuff, it's coming to an end. Now, he doesn't mean permanently, because God will again use Israel in that special relationship in the millennial kingdom. But I believe the time of the Gentiles begins in 722 and doesn't end until the end of the tribulation. And so we have, if you want to view it this way, we have different dispensations at the same time, because the dispensation of the Gentiles covers something different than the dispensation of the church. I know that's confusing, and I probably shouldn't have gone down that path, but God is telling Israel, look, your time of special relationship with me, it's coming to an end, and I'm going to set you aside. And he does that. God reminds them that their preeminence that they felt is going away. And he'll actually follow through with the punishment that he promised them all along the way. We lost somebody along the way. Who'd we lose? Huh. Sandy, yep, we lost Sandy. So on to chapter 7, verse 12. The time has come, the day has arrived. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for the wrath is upon all their multitude. For the seller shall not return to what he has sold while they shall live, for the vision concerns all of their multitude. It shall not turn back, and because of his iniquity, none can maintain his life. Israel's possession of the land comes to an end. There will be great deals in the acquisition of the land. But God warns the seller and the buyer not to celebrate too much, because the punishment will ultimately affect everyone, not just a few. The property will be lost, and the seller has no ability to obtain the land again in their lifetime. God tells Ezekiel that the punishment is coming, and it will affect everyone. No one will escape.
Is that like after 7 years it reverts back, or Jubilee or something?
The year Jubilee is 50 years when the property would revert back.
So it was 50, not 7.
Right.
Okay.
Right. The 7 years is the Sabbath year, in which parts of the land are laid fallow, but the year of Jubilee is 50. And there's a really good extra biblical book from the period of the exile called the Book of Jubilees, which is Israel's history from the vantage point of the Jubilees. And what we learn in looking at that book is they didn't celebrate the year Jubilee very often.
Yeah.
So God had told them to do that, but they didn't do it. But God is reminding them that, nobody's going to be there to buy the land, so it's going to go really cheap, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to get to keep it anyway.
Yeah.
For they have blown the trumpet and made everything ready, but no one goes to battle, for my wrath is upon all their multitude. The sword is without. Pestilence and famine are within. He who is in the fields dies by the sword, and him who is in the city famine and pestilence devour. So Ezekiel's telling the exiles, here's what's going to happen. The people protected in the city, they're just going to starve to death. The people outside the city, they're going to get killed.
Rich, I thought this passage was talking about the tribulation. Is it have a second fulfillment then?
Yeah.
Or is this not about the tribulation?
I would think this is primarily about then, not the tribulation. But there certainly is a second fulfillment of most of these prophecies as Israel is prepared for God, for Jesus on the throne. But primarily, this is a prophecy about their immediate punishment. And what we know from history, this is exactly how it happened. Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Jerusalem, and had it not been for Hezekiah creating the tunnel and the water cistern to bring water in, they would have died years before. But they're able to eat their kids and drink water and sustain themselves for a while. Yeah, it's that bad. The trumpet here refers to the thought of summoning Israel to defend itself from the wrath of God, but no one will respond. No one can respond. And even if they could, they couldn't protect themselves from God's power. Judah for years had worked to appease Babylon, and that didn't work. Israel knew the reality that they could not defend Jerusalem for very long against the powers because they couldn't eat. They had no way to defend themselves. So in 605, here's a little bit of a history lesson. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar defeated Pharaoh Necho in Carchemish, in what is today Syria. Following that battle, Babylon invaded Judah. Babylon had just defeated the Assyrians. Remember, they took the northern tribes in 722, and now Babylon defeats Assyria, and then marches down into Judah. Babylon was now focused on taking the southern tribes. Egypt had protected the southern tribes, but in the Battle of Carchemish, Babylon defeated them, and so he changed his diligence from Egypt to Babylon, and he didn't prevent the siege of Jerusalem. In other words, Pharaoh Necho couldn't defend everything, and so he gave up on Jerusalem, and he ended up still dying, but Jerusalem was no longer protected, and now all of Judah, with the exception of Jerusalem, is held by Babylon. During the years that Nebuchadnezzar attempted to take Egypt, he didn't prevail, so as the Babylon troops came back from Egypt, they would spend time working on Jerusalem. The Jews still occupied Jerusalem, but outside the walls, it was controlled by Babylon. In 597, Babylon again laid siege to the city of Jerusalem, which resulted in King Jehoiakim being taken captive to Babylon with 10,000 others. That's in Jeremiah 52. In 586, another siege of Jerusalem by Babylon resulted in the city and temple being destroyed, and Zedekiah surrendered to Babylon. So when I'm given a brief overview, I always say 605 to 586 because that's when Nebuchadnezzar is working on Jerusalem. 605, he begins working on Judah, and Israel's ally in Egypt doesn't protect them, and so Jerusalem stands there from late 605 to 586, and has nothing coming in. So you can imagine what it's like. Through Assyrian, Babylonian, historical Judah records, this date can be fixed as August 14th, 586 BC. Israel had done all it could, but it was over. God told him it would be over, and on August 14th, 586, it was done. The power of the Babylonians was just too great. And it was so great because God gave it to them. Don't miss that. Several times we're told that Nebuchadnezzar was empowered by God to do what he did, to punish Israel. The sword without is a reference to the Babylonian military outside the city walls. And Judah just had no control of the countryside. Couldn't produce grain or other food for the city. They had to rely just on what was in the city. Life in Jerusalem was horrible, with enemy troops outside the walls and growing disease and filth inside the walls. Death was a reality for everyone in Jerusalem. it is kind of what Berlin went through when the United States did the Berlin airdrop. The Soviets embargoed the city. Nothing was getting in. If it wasn't in the city, you didn't get it. Until we started dropping things in the city. It's the only reason Berlin lived. And if survivors escape, they will be on the mountains like doves in the valleys, all of them mourning, each one over his iniquity. The only refuge for some would be to flee to the mountains, where food would be scarce and water would be difficult to find. The reference is to where doves usually are found. Typically, doves would be in the valleys where food and water are easy to find. But when the bird catcher would come to capture them, they would fly up to the mountains for protection. Just like in Psalm 11, verse 1, "In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain?" All the hands are feeble, and all the knees turn to water. They put on sackcloth, and horror covers them. Shame is on all faces, and baldness on their heads. God continues to describe how incapable Judah will be to defend themselves. He just keeps driving home the fact, you can't stop this. Feeble hands and knees, they provide as much resistance as water does. Judah could do nothing to protect itself. They could only whine, they could only cry, they could only lament. They would end up wearing sackcloth, which symbolizes mourning. In shame, they would cover their face, and their heads would be shaved, all signifying guilt and grief. The question the Bible student naturally ponders here is of what were the Jews in Jerusalem ashamed? Were they ashamed of their failure to live up to their commitment to God in the covenant? Or were they embarrassed at being defeated by Babylon?
Yes.
Probably the latter. They cast their silver into the streets, and their gold is like an unclean thing. Their silver and gold are not able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They cannot satisfy their hunger or fill their stomachs with it, for it was the stumbling block of their iniquity. Judah and Jerusalem could not buy their way out of the judgment. They had nobody to trade with. They couldn't go down the street to the market and buy food. The market had no food. Their punishment was coming. They would be hungry with no way to satisfy it. Their wealth, their gold and silver provided them nothing under the oppression from Babylon. What was so very important to Israel, when you go through the prophets, they're all talking about how Israel did things improperly for the sake of money. And look what happened at the end. What could the money do? Remember, they had the weighted scales. They had the poor transactions. They seized money from people in court. They were all about making money, and in the end, the money could not help them one bit. They were all done. Basically worthless. Okay, it's 7:55. We've been going long tonight, so I think I'm going to end there.
Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.